In a diary entry dated February 12, 1953, discovered decades after her death in a storage unit containing her personal effects, Marilyn Monroe wrote about the diamonds are a girl's best friend, filming in words that revealed the psychological toll of what she'd been forced to do. The entry was 8 pages long, written in her distinctively looping handwriting, with several words crossed out and rewritten, evidence of how difficult it was for her to articulate what she was experiencing. The entry began, "I don't know how to write about what happened today without feeling sick. Hawks made me do the orgasm scene 17 times. 17. I counted. Each time he said it wasn't enough, wasn't obvious enough, wasn't sexual enough. By the end, I wasn't even a person anymore. I was just a body making sounds and movements that men wanted to see. And the whole time there were executives watching, just watching, like I was a show, like I was there for their entertainment." She went on to describe the specific degradation of being directed to make the performance more orgasmic. How Hawks would demonstrate what he wanted, making exaggerated gasping sounds and sexual facial expressions, essentially performing orgasm himself and then demanding she copy it. How the crew would look away, embarrassed, but no one would stop it. How she could hear some of the executives laughing during takes, making comments she couldn't quite hear but could imagine. And how by the 17th take she'd dissociated completely, feeling like she was watching herself from outside her body, watching Norma Jean perform degrading sexuality while pretending to be Marilyn Monroe, while actually being neither, just a thing being used. The most devastating part of the diary entry came near the end. "This is what they mean when they say I'm a sex symbol. They mean I'm the woman who will fake an orgasm for 4 hours while men watch. That's my value. That's my talent. That's what Marilyn Monroe is. And I can't say no because if I say no, I'm not Marilyn Monroe anymore, and if I'm not Marilyn Monroe, I'm nothing." The diary entry revealed that Marilyn had seriously considered quitting acting entirely after the Diamonds filming. She'd talked to her agent about breaking her Fox contract, even knowing it would mean financial ruin and potential blacklisting. She'd talked to her therapist about the trauma of being forced to simulate sex acts on camera. She'd talked to friends about how violated she felt, how the experience had made her understand that her body wasn't her own, that Hollywood owned her sexuality and could demand any performance they wanted, no matter how degrading. But ultimately, she hadn't quit. She'd completed Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, promoted the film with a smile, and watched as the "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" scene became one of the most iconic moments in cinema history. She watched as critics praised it, as audiences loved it, as other actresses were told to emulate it. And she knew that her moment of greatest professional success was built on her moment of greatest personal degradation. In another diary entry, written months later after the film's release, Marilyn reflected on the long-term impact. "Every time someone tells me the Diamond scene is sexy or iconic or brilliant, I want to tell them what it cost me. I want to tell them about the 17 takes and the crying in my dressing room and the feeling of being prostituted, but I can't. Because if I tell the truth about Hollywood demands from women like me, I'll destroy the fantasy. And the fantasy is what they're paying for. So I smile and say thank you, and I die a little more inside." These diary entries painted a picture of Marilyn Monroe that contradicted the happy, carefree sexpot image Hollywood sold. They showed a woman acutely aware that she was being exploited, that her sexuality was being commodified and controlled, but also aware that she had no power to stop it, that the system was designed to extract maximum sexual performance from women while giving them minimum agency. And they showed that the "Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend" scene, which would be celebrated for decades as a triumph of Marilyn Monroe's star power and sex appeal, was actually evidence of her victimization. A permanent record of the moment when Hollywood crossed the line from sexualized performance into simulated pornography, and the woman at the center of it had no choice but to comply or lose everything. If you want to understand the true cost of Hollywood's most iconic scene and how it trapped Marilyn Monroe forever, subscribe now to discover the exploitation they never wanted exposed. In January 1953, when Marilyn Monroe arrived at 20th Century Fox to begin filming Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, she was 26 years old and already a rising star. This was her first major leading role, her first chance to prove she could carry a picture. The script was based on a Broadway musical, and Marilyn had been cast as Lorelei Lee, a beautiful gold digger who believed diamonds were a girl's best friend. It was a role that played into the dumb blonde stereotype she'd been fighting against, but her agent convinced her it was a stepping stone to better parts. "Do this film well," they told her, "and dramatic roles would follow." What no one told her was that director Howard Hawks had very specific ideas about how Marilyn should play the musical numbers. Hawks was known in Hollywood as a demanding perfectionist who extracted performances through relentless repetition and psychological pressure. His reputation also included whispers about his treatment of actresses, about how he would push them past their comfort zones, about how he believed the camera could capture something raw and vulnerable in women if you broke down their defenses first. When Marilyn met with Hawks to discuss the musical number, he explained his vision in terms that made her uncomfortable from the start. He wanted the performance to be overtly sexual, not just suggestive but explicit within the boundaries of what censors would allow. He wanted her to move, to sound, to express herself in ways that simulated sexual pleasure. He wanted the audience to feel like they were watching something forbidden. Marilyn tried to suggest a more subtle approach, using innuendo rather than explicit simulation. Hawks dismissed the idea immediately, explaining that subtlety didn't sell tickets. Audiences wanted to see Marilyn Monroe being sexual, being available, being everything the blonde bombshell image promised. And if she wanted to be a star, she would give the audience what they wanted. Rehearsals began in late January, with choreographer Jack Cole working with Marilyn to develop the movements. Cole was a respected figure known for innovative choreography. He'd worked with Marilyn before and had always treated her with respect, recognizing her intelligence and genuine talent. But on this film, Cole found himself caught between his artistic instincts and Hawks' explicit demands. Hawks attended every rehearsal, repeatedly calling for adjustments that were always in the same direction: more sexual, more obvious, more explicitly orgasmic. When Marilyn would perform a hip movement that Cole choreographed as playful and suggestive, Hawks would demand it be exaggerated, slowed down, made unmistakably sexual. When she would deliver a line with a knowing smile, Hawks would tell her to make it breathier, to add gasps and pauses that simulated arousal. Jack Cole later described these rehearsals as some of the most uncomfortable experiences of his career. He watched as Hawks systematically transformed what had been a clever, playful musical number into something that felt increasingly pornographic. And he watched as Marilyn, who had no power to refuse the direction, slowly shut down emotionally, her body moving mechanically through choreography that had lost all joy. Cole tried to intervene several times, suggesting the performance was becoming too explicit. Hawks responded that Cole's job was choreography, not creative direction. The threat was clear, and Cole backed down. But he made sure that whenever possible, he was there during filming to support Marilyn, to offer whatever small protections he could. The actual filming began on February 11th, 1953. The set was elaborate, designed to look like a courtroom filled with wealthy men in tuxedos. The pink satin gown Marilyn wore was so tight she could barely breathe. The heels were 6 inches high, forcing exaggerated hip movement. Everything was calculated to maximize sexual display. Hawks began filming with the opening section. The first take went smoothly, with Marilyn delivering the choreography as rehearsed. But Hawks wasn't satisfied. He wanted more energy, more sexuality, more of the orgasmic quality he'd been pushing for. Take 2 incorporated his notes. Still not enough. Take 3 pushed further. By take 6, members of the crew were visibly uncomfortable as Marilyn performed increasingly explicit simulations of sexual pleasure. But Hawks was relentless, constantly pushing for more. What made the situation even more degrading was Hawks' decision to invite studio executives and potential investors to the set specifically to watch the filming. He treated Marilyn's sexual performance as entertainment for business associates. Groups of men in suits would stand at the edge of the set, smoking cigars, making comments Marilyn could sometimes overhear, laughing while she performed simulated orgasm for the cameras. Between takes, Marilyn would retreat to a corner of the set, her stand-in and friend Evelyn Moriarty staying close to provide support. Moriarty later described watching Marilyn's face between takes, seeing the humiliation and rage she was working to contain, seeing how she would close her eyes and take deep breaths, trying to dissociate, and Moriarty described the moment, around take 12 or 13, when Marilyn's eyes went completely blank, when she seemed to leave her body entirely, when the performance became purely mechanical because the person inside had retreated somewhere the cameras couldn't reach. By the time Hawks called for take 17, 4 hours had passed. Marilyn had been performing simulated orgasm with increasing explicitness for nearly the entire afternoon. Her makeup was running from sweat and tears. Her voice was hoarse from the breathy, gasping delivery Hawks demanded. Her body was shaking from exhaustion. Take 17 was the breaking point. Hawks demanded one more performance, and Marilyn delivered it. But something had changed. The earlier takes had shown a woman trying to maintain dignity while being forced into increasingly explicit sexuality. Take 17 showed something else, complete disassociation, a body performing movements while the person inside had completely disappeared. When Hawks finally called cut and said that take 17 was the one they would use, Marilyn didn't react. She stood frozen for several seconds, as if she'd forgotten how to stop performing. Then she walked off the set without speaking to anyone, went directly to her dressing room, locked the door and collapsed. Evelyn Moriarty and Jane Russell, Marilyn's co-star, found her there 20 minutes later. They'd convinced a production assistant to unlock the door when Marilyn didn't respond to their knocking. Inside, they found Marilyn still in the pink gown, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, staring at nothing. When Russell asked if she was okay, Marilyn responded with the words that would haunt Russell forever. "I feel like a prostitute. They made me fake an orgasm for 4 hours while men watched and laughed, and I got paid for it. That makes me a prostitute." The next day, when Marilyn returned to the set, the atmosphere had changed. Word had spread about the 17 takes and Marilyn's breakdown. Some crew members were openly angry at Hawks, though none would confront him directly. Hawks himself showed no awareness that anything inappropriate had occurred. He reviewed the footage, declared it perfect, and moved on as if nothing had happened. For Marilyn, the days following were a fog of dissociation and performance. Jane Russell said later that it was like watching someone who'd been hollowed out, a beautiful shell with nothing living inside. Russell also revealed that Marilyn had seriously discussed quitting the film entirely. Her agent and lawyer explained, in brutal detail, what would happen if she broke her contract. Fox would sue her for millions. They would make sure she never worked in Hollywood again. The message was clear: she could continue and survive, or she could resist and be destroyed. Marilyn chose survival. She finished the film, delivered a performance that critics praised as charming, and smiled through the promotional tour. But she never forgot what it cost her. While Marilyn dealt with the psychological aftermath, Fox was engaged in a battle with the Motion Picture Production Code Administration over whether the scene would be allowed in theaters. The first submission resulted in immediate rejection. The written response was damning: too explicitly sexual, too obviously simulated orgasm, too far beyond acceptable content. Joseph Breen, who ran the production code office, sent a detailed letter to studio head Darryl Zanuck explaining what needed to be changed. Zanuck refused. Fox would negotiate, make minimal cuts to satisfy the letter of the code while preserving the sexually explicit performance. What followed was weeks of negotiation, with the footage from Take 17 as the subject of frame-by-frame analysis. The censors would identify specific moments that crossed the line. The studio would remove those frames while arguing the remaining content was acceptable. The process repeated until both sides reached a compromise. The final version that appeared in theaters was shorter than Take 17 by approximately 30 seconds. The most explicitly orgasmic facial expressions had been cut, but what remained was still unmistakably a simulation of sexual pleasure. When the film was released in July 1953, the musical number became instantly controversial and instantly iconic. Churches denounced it, parent groups protested, and audiences packed theaters. The controversy made Gentlemen Prefer Blondes one of the highest-grossing films of 1953 and made Marilyn Monroe a superstar. The success should have opened doors for Marilyn to pursue diverse, challenging roles. She'd proven she could carry a film. Instead, the opposite happened. The musical number became a cage that trapped Marilyn in the sex symbol role forever. Every script was a variation on the same character, the beautiful, sexually available, not too bright woman who existed primarily to be desired by men. Directors and producers had seen what audiences responded to, and they wanted to replicate it over and over. Marilyn fought against this typecasting throughout the 1950s, repeatedly requesting roles in serious dramas, in literary adaptations. She was consistently denied. When she would meet with studio executives, they would point to the box office numbers and tell her audiences wanted to see her being sexy, not serious. There were exceptions. Bus Stop in 1956 showcased dramatic ability. Her work with Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio demonstrated her commitment to craft, and The Misfits in 1961 gave her a complex role. But these exceptions only highlighted how completely she'd been typecast. Critics who reviewed her dramatic work would consistently express surprise that Marilyn Monroe could actually act. And even when her dramatic work was praised, it didn't translate into more dramatic roles. Studios still wanted the Marilyn from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, the woman in the tight pink dress simulating pleasure for male audiences. The long-term psychological impact was devastating. Marilyn's psychiatric records, released decades after her death, showed she discussed the musical number filming repeatedly in therapy, describing it as formative trauma. Dr. Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist during her final years, wrote that Marilyn displayed symptoms consistent with post-traumatic stress when discussing the incident. She would describe feeling outside her body during filming, watching herself perform from a distance. She would describe the humiliation of being observed by executives who treated her sexual performance as entertainment. Greenson noted that Marilyn's relationship to her own sexuality had been fundamentally distorted by experiences like this. She struggled to separate genuine sexual desire from performed sexuality. She had difficulty trusting that men were interested in her as a person rather than as the fantasy object Hollywood had created. The diary entries Marilyn kept returned repeatedly to the theme of prostitution, of selling her body for career advancement. She would frequently reference the musical number filming as the moment when she fully understood what Hollywood expected from her, complete surrender of bodily autonomy in exchange for fame. Friends described watching her struggle with increasing depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. The pills that would ultimately kill her were initially prescribed to help her function in a system that was destroying her. In decades since Marilyn's death, the entertainment industry has gradually acknowledged the exploitation, though that acknowledgement has been incomplete and often sanitized. Film historians write about Hawke's demanding directorial style and the 17 takes as perfectionism rather than abuse. Retrospectives celebrate the musical number as a triumph without discussing what it cost the woman at its center. Jane Russell, in interviews given late in her life, described the filming as exploitative and expressed deep regret that she hadn't done more to protect Marilyn. She acknowledged that power dynamics made it nearly impossible for actresses to refuse directorial demands. Other actors and directors from the 1950s have confirmed that what happened to Marilyn wasn't unique. The studio system regularly demanded actresses perform increasingly explicit sexuality. Women who refused found themselves blacklisted. Women who complied found themselves typecast. The Me Too movement has brought renewed attention to Marilyn's experiences, with feminist critics analyzing the 17 takes as clear sexual exploitation and directorial abuse. But changing how we talk about Marilyn's exploitation doesn't undo the harm. The scene still exists. It's still celebrated, and Marilyn is still dead. having never escaped the cage that scene built around her. One of the most disturbing aspects is what happened to the footage from the 16 unused takes. According to sources who've worked in the Fox archives, that footage still exists, locked in a vault with restricted access. The unused takes include moments that were too sexually explicit, even for the negotiated compromise with censors. Film historians have repeatedly requested access to this footage for research purposes. Fox has consistently refused, claiming that releasing it would be disrespectful to Marilyn's memory. But the real reason may be simpler: it's evidence. Evidence that one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors engaged in behavior that would today be recognized as sexual harassment and exploitation. Evidence that a major studio demanded an actress perform simulated sex acts repeatedly until she broke down. Some who've seen the unreleased footage describe it as difficult to watch because Marilyn's distress is visible in every frame. You can see the moment, around take 12 or 13, when she stops trying to maintain dignity and simply performs whatever is demanded with mechanical compliance. You can see tears mixing with makeup, see exhaustion replacing the spark that made her a star. Today, the musical number from Gentlemen Prefer Blondes remains one of the most iconic scenes in film history. Madonna recreated it in her Material Girl music video. Countless performers have dressed as pink-gowned Marilyn. The image has become shorthand for old Hollywood glamour and female sexuality. But that iconic image was built on exploitation. Every time someone celebrates the scene, they're celebrating 17 takes of forced sexual performance. They're celebrating a moment when a 26-year-old woman was required to simulate orgasm repeatedly for 4 hours while men watched and laughed. Marilyn understood this paradox. She knew that the scene that made her famous was the same scene that trapped her forever. She knew that audiences loved her for being willing to perform degrading sexuality, and that if she stopped being willing, they would stop loving her. The question that haunts anyone who learns the full story is whether we can continue to celebrate the scene, knowing what it cost. Or does knowing the truth require us to see it differently, to recognize it not as a triumph of cinema, but as evidence of abuse? These questions matter because Marilyn Monroe's exploitation wasn't unique to her or to the 1950s. The entertainment industry continues to pressure women to perform sexuality that makes them uncomfortable. The power dynamics that prevented Marilyn from refusing Hawke's demands still exist. Marilyn Monroe died 40 years ago, but her legacy is still contested. She was talented and exploited. She created brilliant performances under terrible conditions. She survived abuse while maintaining the facade of the happy sex pot. And she died young, never escaping the cage built from 17 takes of simulated orgasm performed for men's entertainment. The least we can do is tell the truth about what happened to her, about the 17 takes, about Hawke's demands, about the executives watching, about Marilyn's breakdown and her words, "I feel like a prostitute," about the career consequences and the psychological toll. Because if we don't tell that truth, if we continue to celebrate the scene without acknowledging the exploitation it required, then we're complicit in the same system that destroyed her. That's the real legacy of the 17 takes, not the iconic imagery, the impossible choice.